The book of Revelation says, "The spirit of prophecy is the testimony of Jesus Christ." This is at the very heart of FirstAmendmentRadio.com. In that spirit, we have created the Prophecy Reality News app for all of your mobile devices, streaming First Amendment Radio 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. Available for your Apple, Android device, and smartphone, absolutely free. Get the Prophecy Reality News app installed today, so you can listen to First Amendment Radio wherever you are. The Prophecy Reality News app. Get it now.
Good morning. Welcome to Inquisition Update. My name's Tom Fress, and I'll be your host for the next hour. We're talking about Jesuit casuistry and manipulation, and the last couple paragraphs read thus: if we depend solely on dictionary definitions, we learn that Jesuits are churchmen and teachers of a doubtful moral rectitude, who are likely to cheat, trick, plot, scheme, deceive, and confuse us while avoiding to commit themselves verbally. When we study their published moralists, we sense a rather vibrant presence of the trickster. But in the Society's defense, it must be said that these are legitimate characteristics of a military empowered by a declaration of war. And we must remember that Pope Paul III's bull ordaining the Society of Jesus, Regimini Militantis Ecclesia, is just such a declaration. Human life in a declared war becomes subject to the first great rule of war, belli legem dormit. In other words, in war, the law sleeps. When the law sleeps, the unarmed priest's only weapons are the intrigue, deceit, equivocation, casuistry, and mental reservation with which the Jesuits have made themselves so notorious and so often despised. In forthcoming chapters, we shall examine how the Society of Jesus made war against Great Britain and the British colonies during the second half of the 18th century, and then against the sovereign American states a century later. In each instance, the warfare was of the highest sophistication. It was so subtly conceived and so masterfully executed that neither the major combatants could discern the presence of Jesuits in the equation. The amazing technology of Jesuit warfare, that is the subject of the next chapter. And before we continue, we must remind ourselves, first and foremost, the Jesuits are warriors, and they use every tenet of warfare, both spiritual and physical. And as warriors, they are exempt from the laws of God. And that's the way they wage warfare, by hook or by crook. The end justifies the means. If world conquest for the Pope is their aim, any means they may use to achieve that aim is lawful in the sight of a Jesuit. Remember, white is black and black is white if the general says so. In other words, evil is good and good is evil if the general says so. And that's how the Jesuits operate. They are mindless, willless, soulless robots, like sticks in the hand of an old man to be used any way he pleases. And they respond instantly to his commands, and they execute his demands as if they were possessors of the general's own will. They are an extension of the will of the Jesuits, of the Jesuit general. They are the most wicked, the most powerful, and the most dangerous institution on the planet. And few people even know what a Jesuit is. It's my purpose, one of my purposes here on Inquisition Update, to educate the listeners about the Jesuit order, a subject that is almost unknown in this country by the general population. Now we're going to continue with the reading of the book in Chapter 11, the 13 articles concerning military art. Now these are the arts of warfare, just some of the arts of warfare under which the Jesuits operate. The author, F. Tupper Saucy, writes, before the American Revolution, Roman Catholics were barred from voting or holding public office throughout the British colonies. Now that alone is a fact that most citizens of this country, particularly Protestants, don't know anything about. Remember, Great Britain was British, and the colonies were British before the Revolutionary War. Great Britain was Protestant, and therefore the colonies were Protestant. And many of the people who fled to this country had ancestors, and even some of them themselves were subjects of the Holy Roman Inquisition. Many of their friends and family had paid with their lives at the hands of the Jesuits who were operating the Counter-Reformation. And they fled religious persecution, desiring to worship God according to the dictates of their own conscience and according to the written word of God. And they believed the biblical tenet that Christ is the head of the church, not the Pope, and all men are equal under his headship, under Christ's headship. So the United States, or the colonies at that time, reflected the attitude of Protestant Great Britain, that they were sick and tired of the Pope's oppressions and inquisitions and usurpations of governments and all of his laws and dictates and bulls and excommunications and indulgences and idolatry. They were fed up with it, and they sought a new life in a new land where the papacy was so far away that they might enjoy protection from him. And the Catholics, the few Catholics who came to the colonies, were persecuted by Protestants. And they were not allowed to hold public office. They were not allowed to vote. They were basically non-citizens. Now, we, in this day and age, would think, well, that's not fair. That's not religious freedom. But remember what we were fleeing when we came to this country. All right? The author continues, he says, they were a persecuted minority. Speaking of the Catholics in the colony, they were a persecuted minority everywhere, but in the proprietary domain of William Penn, that is Pennsylvania and Delaware. Some of their most energetic persecutors, in fact, were the very Huguenots whom the Catholics had chased out of France in the wake of Louis XIV's revocation of the Edict of Nantes. Remember, Louis XIV revoked the Edict of Nantes at the command of the Pope, and they exterminated the Protestants, the French Huguenots, out of France. And it were some of these Huguenots who escaped the terrible extirpation of the Huguenots, who escaped that and came to this country, seeking refuge from Rome's wicked hand. And it was some of these Huguenots who persecuted the Catholics, and justly so, in light of history. Now it says the basis of Roman Catholic persecution was political. Catholics owed allegiance to the Pontifex Maximus, the Pope, the Bishop of Rome. The Bishop of Rome was a foreign ruler who, as a matter of public policy, regarded the British king and his Protestant church as heretics to be destroyed. So remember, the Catholics in this country and yea, all over the world, had their first loyalty to the Pope, no matter in what country they lived. If they were good Catholics, they held the Pope to be their primary authority in their lives, even more so than the king of the country that they lived in. It says the Bishop of Rome was a foreign ruler who, as a matter of public policy, regarded the British king and the Protestant church as heretics to be destroyed. From the American colonist standpoint, to allow Catholics to vote or hold office was tantamount to surrendering their colonies to that foreign conqueror, the Pope. And that's exactly the way we should view it today. To see Roman Catholics in the White House, Roman Catholics in the seat of the Speaker of the House, to see Roman Catholics at the head of every commission in Congress is to cede control of those institutions to Pontifex Maximus, to the Pope. We're seeing today what the colonists feared, what the colonists rebelled against in this country. They would not allow a Catholic to have a position of power in this country. And what do we see today? As we read earlier in the book, there are prominent Roman Catholics in just about every committee in Congress, in controlling positions in those committees, chairman. And we went through a laborious list of all the institutions of our society that they control, that they ultimately have responsibility for. And every one of us need to ask the question, who are they serving? Are they serving the good of this Protestant constitutional republic? Or are they serving the good of the Pontifex Maximus, who holds their souls in his hand, in whom they believe Christ has made him vicar, placement, and in whom their salvation depends? Their first loyalty, the first loyalty of every good Catholic, is indeed the Pope. And we as Protestants, or any non-Catholic, are virtually oblivious to this understanding. Now, it's an understanding that was common back in the 1800s, but it's virtually disappeared from our mentality today. And that's demonstrated by the ecumenical movement. Were we as wise today as they were in the 1800s, the ecumenical movement would not even be a possibility. It wouldn't even be up for debate. But we've lost. We've lost that knowledge that the papacy is the biblical Antichrist. Even his title means Antichrist. That's what Vicar of Christ means, Antichrist. All right, a crucial part of maintaining personal liberty in Protestant colonial America was keeping Roman Catholics out of government. But then came the Revolution. The colonial citizenry fought for and won their independence from Great Britain. They established a constitution that amounted to surrendering their country to a foreign conqueror. Remember, if we're going to separate the colonies from Protestant Great Britain, and there's a controlling Catholic authority in the government of this country, and Catholics through that Revolutionary War gained religious liberty and the right to rule in public office and to vote and to have influence in our government, then they have won for the Pope this country. Think about it. All right, consider the legalities. Before the Constitution was ratified, American Catholics had few civil rights. After ratification, they had them all. Article 6, Section 3 provides that no religious test shall ever be required as a qualification to any office or public trust under the authority of the United States, unquote. Now, if you're all about religious freedom, which is a panacea that would work if there were no one single religion ever seeking to usurp the rights of others, religious liberty is a great thing, at least in our minds. But we can't expect that to be true given the 1,500 years of history of Roman Catholic ascendancy in the world and their extirpation of Protestantism and their extirpation of those who were Protestant before Protestantism even was created, like the Waldenses. They persecuted God's people. Anybody that reads the Bible and believes what it says and understands that the Pope has no authority in the world, and the Roman Catholic Church is a human contravention of blasphemy, they simply cannot accept the Pope's authority in their lives. And the Pope forever waged war, unrelenting, persistent, eternal war against those segments of the world society. And who are we to think? What one of us today has the right to even suspect or even hope that the papacy won't do the same in this country? We've completely lost our ability to comprehend this. When heard for the first time, these words must sound like an outrageous proposition to Americans who've been raised in a country that says religious freedom's the law of the land. Any religion may be practiced in this country, and the government must keep its hands out. But does the government keep its hands out of religious affairs? The evidence is plain. No, the government is establishing Roman Catholicism as the religion of this land. And if you can't comprehend that concept, at least you have to admit that so much of our government is controlled by Roman Catholics in the executive branch, the legislative branch, and the judicial branch. And don't forget the ecumenical movement. They even control the churches. To sway all of our Protestant churches, to forget their Protestant heritage, to forget their Protestant martyrs, to forget what our Protestant founders taught, that the Roman Catholic Church was the seat of the biblical Antichrist and the papacy was Antichrist itself, and yet unite with the Roman Catholic Church on anything would be unheard of in those days. But that's what defines the ecumenical movement. What defines Protestantism today is unity and peace with Rome. And to speak otherwise is to become labeled a divider and not a uniter. Someone who is contrary to Christianity. And we've got to get our hats straight on this. Ecumenism is the destruction of Protestantism and the victory of Catholicism. And in no other way can it be expressed. So Article 4, Section 3 gave the premise that no religious test should ever be used as a qualification for any public office or trust in the United States of America. While the First Amendment denies Congress the power to make any law respecting an establishment of religion or prohibiting the free exercise thereof, unquote. With Article 4, Section 3 in the First Amendment, the Constitution welcomed agents of Pontifex Maximus, in other words, the Roman Catholics, and particularly the Jesuits. They are the agents of Pontifex Maximus, the Pope. It welcomed those papal agents, the world's chief enemy of Protestantism, into the ranks of our government. Was the Revolutionary War a good thing? Is that thing we celebrate every 4th of July a good thing? You know, people don't look at the history. They look at the fireworks. They look at the celebration. They look at the hot dogs on the grill. They look at the beer in the keg. They look at the girls in bikinis. They don't think about what they're celebrating. It's a Catholic celebration. To celebrate the separation of this country from Protestant Great Britain is a Catholic thing to do. If you'll pardon me, it's a Catholic thing to do. Protestantism enjoyed no victory in the Revolutionary War. It was the surrender of this country to the Vatican. And F. Tupper Saucy is bringing that reality to my mind. He says of the 2,500,000 enumerated inhabitants in 1787 America, the Roman Catholic population consisted of no more than 16,000 in Maryland, 7,000 in Pennsylvania, 1,500 in New York, and 200 in Virginia. Once the Constitution was in place, a steady influx of European immigrants transformed Roman Catholicism from America's smallest to the largest religious denomination. Why were Catholics flooding to this country? Because Rome was sending them here. They did not have religious liberty in Protestant Great Britain. They were still persecuted in Protestant Great Britain. They weren't allowed to say the Mass publicly. They weren't allowed to have public office. They were regarded as second-class citizens. But when the Revolution took place and the Constitution established religious liberty, Catholics flooded to this country. We didn't read about that in our history books, did we? Guess who writes the history books? The great educators, the Jesuit universities. It says by 1850, the highest powers at Rome could view the United States as a viable tributary, if not another papal state. Now that's a concept that has never been introduced to me until I began my research a few years ago. By 1850, the middle of the 1800s, Rome had virtually conquered this country, according to at least this author, F. Tupper Saucy. And we'll continue with the reading and study of this book, Rulers of Evil by F. Tupper Saucy, when we return from the break. You're listening to Inquisition Update with Tom Fresno. We'll be back right after this message.
Visit crosstheborder.org crosstheborder.org, to get your print, EPUB, or PDF version of the book, The Rapture Will Be Canceled. That's crosstheborder.org.
I know you all want answers, and believe me, so do I, and I'll do my best to get them.
Despite Nicolas Cage's promise to do his best to get left behind rapture answers for us, don't hold your breath. Not everyone believes Left Behind is true prophecy. Some may even regard as conspiratorial the mainstream re-release of the Left Behind movie, with actor Nicolas Cage portraying the main character, as an attempt to further reinforce in the minds of all this perception of false prophecy, in order to condition the masses for the play about to begin. If you want true Bible prophecy answers, get the book, The Rapture Will Be Canceled. The author exposes the Latin rapture origin, the 7-year tribulation deception, true Bible revelation of Daniel's 70 weeks, the abomination of desolation, the restrainer, America in the Revelation, the image of the beast and the mark of the beast, and the truth about God's chosen people, and so much more about Bible prophecy. This book will shatter the Left Behind paradigm of future events. Get the book, The Rapture Will Be Canceled. Visit crosstheborder.org, crosstheborder.org, to get your print, EPUB, or PDF version of the book, The Rapture Will Be Canceled. That's crosstheborder.org.
The program you are listening to is 100% sponsored by you, the listener, on this First Amendment Rights Media channel. You will notice that there are few commercials on this radio network. There's a good reason for that. Corporate advertising dollars come with strings that limit program content. So without your help, these programs cannot continue on internet or our several affiliates. If you benefit by the educational law programs, we ask you to give. If you are admonished or nurtured by the Bible and ministry programs, we ask you to give. If some voice a cause that you are passionate about, we ask you to give. If you believe in any of these, we ask you to support them as you would a missionary on a continual basis, as if giving a tithe for missionary radio. These programs are not commercially viable and must be supported by those faithful to the cause of truth. Look for the button to sponsor your favorite programs at our listen and schedule pages on the internet. Then, when you subscribe, we will send you the last quarterly MP3 CD of that program immediately, and continue to do so with each new quarter. We will also give you unlimited archive access to all of our programs. We're asking you to give much less than a tithe, so that you may also send support directly to a particular program host, cause, and anywhere else the Spirit may lead you. Do all to the glory of our God and Creator, for His holy nation, the only kingdom that will last forever. Thank you for listening.
Welcome back from the break. You're listening to Inquisition Update, and we're heard at 10 a.m. Central, 11 Eastern, and again at 6 p.m. and 7 p.m. Eastern. So, if you missed the live broadcast, there's one other opportunity, and if that's not flexible enough for you, you can subscribe and gain unfettered access to the archives, and you can support Inquisition Update with your contribution. And remember, I take nothing for doing this program. It's my God-given pleasure to do this. And I'm blessed by it. And I'm strengthened by it. And what God gives me for free, I freely give in return. And so your contributions go to help buy bandwidth and equipment and keep the lights burning. It's a low overhead operation, but we still need your help. Bills need to be paid. Your money is best spent in a ministry that doesn't keep secrets. Your church, your ecumenical church, is keeping secrets from you. And we're exposing those secrets here on Inquisition Update. So support the broadcast and it'll continue. Now, before the break, we ended with the thesis that the Revolutionary War, if you'll just think of it in terms that Tupper Saucy has brought forward, was a colossal victory for the Pope and a stunning defeat for Protestantism. Now, isn't that exactly what the Jesuit order is all about? To raise the papacy to world supremacy in all lands and to extirpate Protestantism? Can we forget for a moment what we learned in our history books in school, that the Revolutionary War was a victory for this country? And stop and look at who really benefited by the Revolutionary War? Stop and think for a minute. Who benefited? Certainly it was not Protestantism. And we have to question why our history books in school did not include this truth. Well, there's a theory that goes something like this. The victors of war get to write the history. And examining the history that we got in our high school books, it's evident that the critical understanding of what happened at the Revolutionary War was omitted from those history books so that we wouldn't realize that it was a victory for the Pope and a defeat for Protestantism. Because if we were aware of that, then maybe we might take steps to prevent any further rise of Catholicism in this country. But instead, we've lived the lie for 225 years. Religious liberty is the law of the land. It's something to be proud of. Now, I believe in religious liberty. God didn't force himself on anyone. The leading of the Spirit convicts a man. It's God who saves. It's God who calls, and it's God who chooses. But we know from history that Catholicism doesn't believe in religious liberty. And as I've repeated so many times on the broadcast, it becomes cliche, but it bears repeating, that during Pope Benedict XVI's visit to America last April, one of his most powerful bishops in this country, Newhouse, sat on the set of EWTN and clearly said, no man has the right to choose his own religion. No man has a right to choose what he will believe. Now, that's not religious liberty. It's religious liberty from the Catholic mindset. It's liberty to practice Catholicism in the absence of any competition. Unfettered Catholicism. Catholicism established by government. And Catholicism empowered to extirpate non-Catholicism. That's what religious liberty is to a Roman Catholic. A devout Roman Catholic, a devout papist. And they as much as admitted it. They're becoming very bold and brazen these days. And all you have to do is examine what they say. Now, that was no Pope speak that Newhouse said. That was plain English, that any Protestant who heard it would have said, what did he just say? It's not religious liberty that they want in this country. By our definition of religious liberty, our definition is that to allow anyone to practice whatever religion they believe. Live and let live. But religious liberty does not mean that in the Catholic mind. Religious liberty means freedom to practice Catholicism unfettered in the full scope of Catholicism, which means world domination, and to fulfill the quote-unquote divine will for the Pope to rule the world as Christ's vicar. That's what it means. And the victors during the Revolutionary War were the papists and the Pope, and they wrote our history books. Now, the author, F. Tupper Saucy, continues. He says, this awesome result did not just happen. He says, I submit that it was brilliantly designed and commanded by a man I am pleased to honor as the American Republic's least known founding father, Lorenzo Ricci. Ricci was a Tuscan aristocrat by birth, a stoical philosopher by reputation, and a Jesuit father by profession. He was the superior general of the Society of Jesus during the formative years of the American Revolution from 1758 to 1775. He also may be credited with having written the most celebrated treatise on war ever published, a work entitled The 13 Articles Concerning Military Art. This author, in this last paragraph, just revealed to us something that we just have to consider. That the Jesuit general and the Jesuits of Europe, the Counter-Reformation militia, fomented the American Revolution to break the colonies away from Protestant Great Britain for a purpose. And that is so Catholicism could rise to ascendancy in this country. And we're going to develop this thesis as we continue. He says, the reputed author of this work, talking about the 13 Articles Concerning Military Art, the reputed author of this work is a quasi-historical Chinese general believed to have lived in the 6th century B.C., named Sun Tzu. Sun Tzu was unknown in the Western languages until Joseph Marie Amiot, astronomer to the Emperor of China, brought forth a French edition of the 13 Articles in 1772. Amiot was a Jesuit priest under obedience to General Ricci. I base my inference that Ricci is the author of Amiot's Sun Tzu on a remark from today's premier Jesuit spokesman, Malachi Martin, retired professor at the Pontifical Institute in Rome, to the effect that a book written by a Jesuit, due to the obedience factor, can be presumed in essence to be the work of the superior general, the Jesuit general, Ricci. He says, Amiot's Sun Tzu, then, can be presumed to have been written by Lorenzo Ricci, the Jesuit general. The Black Pope's decision to publish Sun Tzu prior to the outbreak of the Revolution he had engineered demonstrates, I believe, his confidence that divine authority had already delivered victory to him. In other words, you wouldn't publish your articles of warfare prior to the commencement of the conflict if you did not thoroughly understand and believe that because those articles fell into your hands, the victory had already been declared. That's what the author is implying here. And as we continue, he'll develop this. He says, Ricci knew that circumstances had reached the point at which there was nothing which his enemy, the force of Protestantism on both sides of the Atlantic, could do to alter the outcome. In other words, it was a done deal. He knew he had us whipped. He was like a chess master who sees the inevitability of a checkmate 4 moves ahead and reveals his winning method out of courtesy to the imminent loser. His method was so sublimely Sun Tzuian that his opponents never even perceived his army to be an opponent. He's talking about the Jesuit order. No one suspected the Jesuits as a part of the revolution. Why? Because 3 years earlier they'd been suppressed by a papal bull, Dominus Ac Redemptor Noster, by Pope Benedict Pope Clement XIV. He says his method was so sublimely Sun Tzuan that his never even perceived his army to be an opponent. Just as Protestants today are totally unaware that extirpating their credo is still the unrelenting Jesuit mission. I couldn't have said it better. Protestants today are oblivious to the reality that their extirpation is decreed by the unrelenting Jesuit mission. The Jesuits will achieve their mission, or they will cease to be Jesuits. The purpose of Jesuitism is to destroy Protestantism. That is the critical and most prominent tenet of their oath. It says the 13 Articles was ignored by Americans until the 1970s, when our corporate executives discovered that their Oriental counterparts were doing business according to Sun Tzuan strategies. As U.S. corporations increased their presence in the Pacific Rim, Sun Tzu became a major survival tool. Since the middle 80s, more than 50 editions of the Articles have been published in this country, mostly under the Art of War title. These editions represent Sun Tzu well enough, but none of them are derived from the 1772 Amiot translation into French, which itself was based on a Tartar Manchurian version of the older Chinese manuscripts. Amiot Sun Tzu appears never to have been published in English, although in 1996, commissioned by Labelle Église, produced a very fine transcript English translation by Herman F. Garcia. That transcript is the source of my citations here, says Saucy. Only the Amiot edition reflects in virtually the Jesuit general's own words how he formed the United States of America by dividing the British Empire against itself, while at the same time dividing the rest of Europe against Britain, against even the general's own army, the Jesuit order. The Amiot is all the more remarkable for appearing in the very midst of the unfolding of this extraordinary process. Amiot begins the 13 Articles by noting how odd it is that the benign Chinese morality should spawn a warrior of Sun Tzu's magnitude. Quote, if we are to judge the Chinese by their morals, and in general by everything one can currently observe of them, we would instantly conclude that this must be the most pacifist nation in the world, far from having the brilliant qualities necessary for warriors. Yet surprisingly, this nation, which has subsisted for nearly 4,000 years in approximately the same state we see it today, has always, or almost always, triumphed over all of its enemies. And when it had the misfortune of being conquered, it gave its laws to the conquerors themselves, unquote. We know this, Amiot says, from the Annals, which contain admirable accounts of prodigious bravery and lists of actions and military conduct of various founders of dynasties. He exclaims, quote, "What heroes, what politicians, what warriors! No Alexander or Caesar could surpass them. Why shouldn't these great men, these powerful geniuses who made such fine political and civil laws, have made military laws which are just as fine?" Unquote. The reference to Caesar is significant. Declaring China's dynastic heroes to be Caesar's equals, Amiot equates Lorenzo Ricci, the reigning bearer of Caesarian authority, with the greatest Oriental warriors. Were the Oriental military laws just as fine as Caesar's? Is it not up to me to judge this, Amiot answers. Our warriors must pronounce themselves in this regard. If the term our warriors means our Jesuit brethren, as I believe it does, then we have before us Ricci's clandestine order that the book be received by the scattered members of the Society of Jesus as the latest statement of the general's military law. And Saucy makes another comment. He says, clandestine generals order clandestinely. He says, Amiot admits that translating a war manual was contrary to my tastes and so far from the object of my profession. He says that he only undertook the work in hopes that the reader might have some pleasure conversing with these foreign heroes and receiving some of their instructions and finding something useful. What cannot be denied is that Rome was served by critical events in America and England during the years of Ricci's reign in ways that flow quite discernibly from the strategies, laws, and maxims set forth in the 13 Articles. I believe that anyone reading Amiot's Sun Tzu of 1772, knowing that its translator was a Jesuit, knowing the Jesuit mission to extirpate Protestantism, I'll add, and knowing the nature of Jesuitic obedience, could observe world events with this knowledge and predict that the dispute between the American colonies and the British Empire would end, as it actually did, in Roman dominance over a new independent republic. That's huge, if you stop and think about it. He says nobody who reads these 13 articles, especially if they happen to crop up just before the Revolutionary War, during the time of the so-called suppression of the Jesuits, that the Jesuits weren't using the articles to foment the Revolutionary War for the purposes of the Jesuits and the Vatican. It's just a natural conclusion that one can't deny is plausible. You know, the proof is in the outcome. Who benefited? Qui bono? Who benefited? Now, we've been living under the assumption that our country benefited, but we haven't been given all the information. It says, before presenting the works of Sun Tzu, Amiot recounts an important legend demonstrating the 70 Sun Tzuan authority. It is a severity that empowers the Jesuit general to overrule even his sovereign in order to secure the army's perfect obedience. Hearing that the king of O was preparing for war and not wishing to remain idle, Sun Tzu offered his services to the king. The king had read Sun Tzu's book and liked it, but doubted its practicability. Quote, "Prince," replied Sun Tzu, "I said nothing in my writings that I had not already practiced in the army. What I have not yet said, but of which I presume to assure your majesty today, is that I am capable of transmitting these practices to anyone whomsoever, and train them in military exercises when I am authorized to do so." "I understand," replied the king. "You wish to say that you will easily teach your maxims to intelligent men who are already both prudent and valorous, that you will have no difficulty giving training in military exercise to men accustomed to hard work, who are docile and full of goodwill, but the authority is not of that nature. But the majority is not of that nature." "It matters not," replied Sun Tzu. "I said anyone whomsoever, and I exclude no one from my offer, including the most mutinous and the most cowardly and the weakest of men." "To hear you speak," said the king, you would even inspire women to have the feelings of warriors. You would train them to bear arms." "Yes, Prince," replied Sun Tzu in a firm voice, "and I beg your majesty to be assured of it." The king, who in the circumstances in which he found himself was no longer entertained by the customary amusements of court, took advantage of this opportunity to find a new sort of amusement. He said, "Bring me 180 of my wives." He was obeyed, and the princesses appeared. Among them were two in particular whom the king loved tenderly. They were placed ahead of the others. "We will see," said the king, smiling. "We will see, Sun Tzu, if you will be true to your word. I make you general of these new troops. All throughout my palace, you need only choose the place which seems the most comfortable to give them military training. When they are sufficiently instructed, you will let me know, and I will come myself to render justice to them, to your talent." The general sensed the ridicule of the role he was asked to play, but he did not back down, and instead appeared quite satisfied by the honor bestowed upon him by the king, not only by allowing him to see his wives, but also by putting him under his direction. "I will do well with them, sire," he said in an assured tone, "and I hope that soon your majesty will have cause to be satisfied with my services. At the very least, your majesty will be convinced that Sun Tzu is not a man who takes risks." Unquote. Once the king had retired to his apartments, the warrior thought only of executing his commission. He asked for weapons and all the military equipment needed for his newly created soldiers. While waiting for everything to be ready, he led his troops into one of the courtyards of the palace, which seemed the best suited for his work. Soon the items he had requested were brought to him. Sun Tzu then spoke to the princesses. "Here you are," he said, "under my direction and my orders. You must listen to me attentively and obey me in whatever I command you to do." And we'll pick up where we left off tomorrow, put a mark there, and we're going to show the art of Sun Tzuian warfare tomorrow. You won't want to miss it. It's just a glimpse of understanding how the Jesuit order operates and how lethal they are in this country. We'll see you tomorrow on Inquisition Update.
Since the beginning of time, kings have sought it, nations have fought for it, it has been traded, It has been borrowed. It has been purchased. It has been stolen. There's a reason for it. To secure the blessings of liberty to ourselves and to our posterity. Invest with the security of gold and silver. Call Discount Gold and Silver Trading at 1-800-375-4188 or visit discountgoldandsilvertrading.net. Listen to Financial Survival with your host Melody Cedarstrom right here on FirstAmendmentRadio.com at 4 p.m. Eastern or 1 p.m. Pacific Time. Visit discountgoldandsilvertrading.net or call Discount Gold and Silver Trading at 1-800-375-4188. Toll free 1-800-375-4188.